Hi, this is Jesper from Velocitypeak, and in today's Cinema 4D tutorial, we're gonna make this. We have particles traveling along the surface of this text here, and we're using the new field force, new from Cinema 4D release 21, and we control where the particles appear by using fields. If you want to grab the scene files and the project files for this, they are on velocitypeak.com. But let's start. Okay, so here I have a scene already set up. So let me just play this back so you can see how it works with the fields. So if I play this back now and grab the spherical field, you can see that it's only happening wherever the spherical field is active. So we can control this in any way we want. And of course, we can animate this and we can add more fields if we want. So let's start. Let me delete everything except a few elements we can use later on for rendering. I'm just gonna delete that and go back to the first frame and start fresh. So I'm gonna bring in a text object and let's frame this up a little better. And I'm just gonna type in XB. There's no particular reason why, but I do like the letter X in general. And let's do a more interesting font here. I'm gonna do this one, Museo Sans Rounded. And then obviously, if you don't have this one, just choose something else, preferably a somewhat bold or big, thick font. And let's put this, let's do this align to the middle. And let's put this inside of an extrude object. So if we hold down Alt or Option and click on the extrude, it's going to become a child of that extrude. And let's extrude this a little more. Let's do, say, 40. So that's good. Now I prefer to have this smack in the center. So I'm going to move the text spline back on the Z, -20, just so it sits right in the center like that. And because the field force is an R21 feature only, we might as well use another R21 feature, which is the new cap system. I'm going to go into the presets, and I'm going to load this one, the inner bevel. And that looks really nice, especially on this type of a font. Now, it comes in the back as well. We don't necessarily need it in the back because we're not going to see the back. So I am going to turn on this separate bevel controls. Just going to turn it off for the back. And let's see. So that is the shape. So let me twirl that up. And the next thing I'm going to do is add a matrix to this. So let's go up to the MoGraph menu and add a matrix. I'm going to pull that underneath. And in the matrix, I'm going to go to the Object tab, and the mode is going to be Object. And the object is going to be our text. So bring in the Extrude Object. And we don't want to generate matrices only. We want thinking particles. And I'm going to generate a lot of these. So I'm going to bring this up to 6,000. It's going to look a little weird here. We don't necessarily need to see the matrix object, so I'm going to turn it off. But now you can see that we have a whole bunch of thinking particles there. And they're not doing anything. We need to hook this up. And the first step to be able to do this now is to bring in a volume builder. Let's do that. Let's go get the volume builder. I'm going to put that below the extrude. And the object we need in the volume builder is the extrude. And the type, we want to use this new one, the vector. And a vector is essentially a direction. So these lines are indicating the different directions. And I'm going to set the voxel size to 0.5. A smaller voxel size is just going to make sure that the splines are closer to the actual text later on. So that is good. Now, let's bring in a field force. So under Simulate, and then under Forces, we have the new field force. Let me pull this down. And in the field force, what do we want to do? Well, we want to change the velocity type from add to velocity to absolute velocity. And the 5 is pretty weak. So let's bring this up to 300. So it's a lot stronger. And then what are we going to put in the field force? We're going to put the volume builder in there. And it's going to ask us, do we want to use this as a point object or a volume object? And we want to choose the volume object. So the next step here is to connect the field force with the thinking particles. And this is where espresso comes in. But it's so simple. Let's bring in a null so we can put the espresso on the null. And let's call it espresso. And let's add a tag to this, programming tags and espresso. And that's going to pop up the espresso editor. And we just need two things here. I'm going to right click and say new node and then thinking particles. And we need to initiate it. So TP initiator P pass. And then right click again, new node, and say thinking particles. And we want to go down to dynamic objects and do the force object. So now we need to tell it what kind of force object we want to use. So we can simply take the field force and drag it on top of this node. And then we just connect the ports. And then that's it. The espresso is done. It's pretty easy. Let's close this window and let's just see what we get. So we don't get what we want yet. We need to do a few more things. We need to have something that can drive the thinking particles. And I'm going to use a field for that. I'm going to use a random field. So if we go up to the fields menu and add a random field. And let's go to the volume builder. And I'm going to drag the random field on top of the extrude. And here we need to do two things. We need to change the mode to the new cross. And that mode is going to enable the particles to travel along the surface. And then we also want to do one more thing. We want to change the creation space from box. Right now, this is a very small box, 10 by 10 by 10. Now we can increase this size and we can use the box as well. But an even better way is to change the creation space to objects below. And then it's just going to be created wherever the extrude is. So let's try this now and see what we get. So now we have movement. And the next step is to have the thinking particles drive splines. And we can use the tracer for that. So let's go to the MoGraph menu and add a tracer. And I'm going to put that at the bottom. And it pulled in the volume builder. I'm going to delete the volume builder. And instead, I'm going to use the matrix. And the rest can stay the same. Now, when you go out for render, you may want to change this from linear to, say, Bezier or any other mode, and intermediate points, perhaps natural or uniform or something like that. That's going to make them smoother. But linear and none is going to be a lot quicker as we work. Now, in the tracer, I also want to limit this. So instead of full-length trails, let's do from end. And we can do, let's do 45 frames. Let's see what we get. Let me rewind and let's play this. So, okay, so we are getting the trails. Now, let's turn off the volume builder, or not turn it off, hide it. So it's not so distracting. And I also want to go into the random field and up the scale to, say, 400. I mean, you can play with this and get very different types of looks, but I usually find that a decent size scale, bigger scale, is going to generate nicer looking trails in general. So if we play this back now, I think that's a more pleasing look. But of course, this is all about preference. But that's working the way it's supposed to. So success. Now, how do we do now to control this with fields? Well, let's go to the field force. And the way we're going to do this is by using a mask. So if I go down here and select the volume builder and then enable a mask. And then I'm going to go up to the fields menu and I'm going to bring in a spherical field. And then I'm going to go back to the field force. And I want to make sure that this spherical field is a child of that new mask. And let's dolly out. Let's make the spherical field a little smaller. Let's do it like, I don't know, 50, 60, something like that. And let me pull this out. So if I play back now, nothing is going to happen. Only when the spherical field is interacting with the text now are we going to get the effect. And I can pull it out. And we have 45 frames from the end. So it's going to live for a little while after we pull out the linear field. But that's essentially how you can control it with fields. Now you can also add multiple fields if you want. So if I say call this one spherical field right, and then control drag to make a copy and call the other one left, like so. And then let's take the one on the left and pull it to the left side. Let's go back into the field force. And I want to bring in the spherical field left as well. Now, the key point here is to look at the blending modes. If I take the right field here and pull it up here, and the left one as well, so they're both on top of the text. If I play this back now, only one is going to work. And that's because in the field force, the left spherical field has a blending mode set to normal, so it's going to override whatever is underneath. I'm going to set the bottom one to be normal, but the left spherical field here, we can set it to max or we can set it to add. And that's going to allow them to both work at the same time, like so. Now we could take one of them and we can move it like so. So let's animate this. I'm going to take this one, pull it to the bottom, and then the left one to the top. Something like that. And go to frame 0. And let me put the right one a little further down. And let's go into the coordinate system and let's animate X and Y. Z, we can animate Z too, doesn't matter. We're not going to use it, but that's okay. And let's go to frame 200. And let's take the one on the right side, pull it up. I'm making sure I'm dragging just the axis band on, so it's moving on the X and Y only. And let's do the same thing for the left one. Let's pull it down. And let's make sure we set keyframes for both of them. If we play back now, we're going to have an ease in, but that's okay. And then pick a frame, something like, I don't know, something like this, I think works. And then let's just see how we can render this. I'm going to render this with Redshift. If you don't have Redshift, I did another Field Force tutorial, and in that one we used the hair system. So you can refer to that. But let's use Redshift here. Now, to be able to render with Redshift, we need to go to the tracer and let's add a Redshift tag, Redshift object, and in my original sample, I used hair strands, but let's use cylinders. And thickness of 0.1 should be fine. I have a couple of elements here, or a few elements that we can use for the rendering. So let me unhide those and twirl it down. So what we have is we have a backdrop, and there's a camera, and I've set up 3 lights, one on the right side, one on the left side, and then there's one on the top here, which is a very skinny light, like so. Let's go into that camera, and let's open up the Redshift render view. And I'm also going to go into the render settings and make sure we have Redshift, and we do. And let's create a new material. Create Redshift materials, and I'm going to do an incandescent. And let me apply that to our tracer. And I also made a material for the text, so let's add that to the extrude, like that. And you can see that I already had a test run here. Let me see what we get. I also want to make sure that we don't have too many passes. 128 to start with. I usually prefer to have lower amount of passes as I am previewing things. Okay, so we have some sort of a start. Actually, let's go back to the render settings. I have global illumination enabled. Let's turn that off for now. It's going to be quicker to render that way. So let's go into our material here. And let me pull this over. And what I need to have the vertex attribute. And I'm going to use that in conjunction with a ramp. So let's search for a ramp. Get a ramp. So in the vertex attribute, I'm going to go to the pull down here on curves, and I'm going to use this curve ID color. And if I pull that into the incandescent material, you're going to see that it's going to generate random colors. You can see that we have the rainbow colors here. So let's route that through the ramp. And let's go in, try that again, and input. And then we put the ramp colors in there instead. And what kind of a ramp do we want? Let's just do a preset. I'm going to do, say, this preset. Looks pretty nice. I like that. And perhaps I'm going to go into the incandescent and just up the intensity to, say, 2. We have something like that. And that's essentially it. That's all you need to do to set up this rendering. So I'm going to close this. And if I go back to the render settings, if I just do a frame here, one thing I should say that if I would render this out as an animation, I would go to the tracer and I would right click and I would do bake as alembic. It has lots of upsides. It's more predictable. You get a faster scrubbing on the timeline. You can retime this as well. But in this case, I'm just going to render out a frame. But if I were to render out an animation, I would certainly bake this out as an alembic. Just a side note. So let's go. So for just this frame, I am going to use one of the new features. This is the latest release of Redshift 3.0.16, I think. And they have started to implement, under the experimental options, they have something called enable automatic sampling. So let's use that. I'm going to enable that. And essentially what that does, Redshift takes over all the sampling that we usually have to set on individual elements. So if I go back to the basic tab, the samples, the minimum and maximum, they don't have an effect now. But what has an effect is this adaptive error threshold. So this essentially becomes like a noise. What's the acceptable noise? So 0.01 or 0.01 is fairly low. So we could set that to, say, 0.03 or something like that. It depends on what kind of scene you want to render out for. Now, I also want to enable global illumination for this, and I'm going to use brute force. And then I'm going to use secondary GI engine for irradiance point cloud. Now, my understanding is that the automatic sampling doesn't work with the irradiance point cloud, but I'm going to use it anyway. So there's that. And let's close this, and let's enable bucket rendering. And this will be the final result. So there you have it. This is how we can set up the field force and control where it appears on the objects by using fields and masks. So thank you for sticking around and watching this. If you want the scene files, you can grab them over on velocitypeak.com. And I'll see you next time.